The Adventures of the Blue Carbuncle. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Stone. It was a couple of days after Christmas, and I decided to call in on my good friend Sherlock Holmes. He was laying on his sofa, smoking his pipe, and looking like he was very deep in thought. I glanced around the room and noticed a very dirty black torn hat hanging on the back of a chair. I also noticed a magnifying glass on the chair. I assumed that Holmes had been examining it. "You are busy," I said. "Perhaps I interrupted you." After some moments had passed, Holmes finally spoke. "Not at all. The problem is simple, and it is still interesting. You know the doorman, Peterson, don't you?" he asked. "He found that hat and brought it here. He also found it with a large fat goose. He's cooking the goose now. The facts are this: Peterson went to a party on Christmas Eve, which went on until very late the next morning. When Peterson was walking home at about 4 a.m., he saw a man walking in front of him. He was a tall man. He was carrying the goose, and he was also wearing that hat. The tall man walked along a little further when a group of men suddenly appeared and attacked him. He fought back with his stick, but ended up breaking a window behind him. The sound of the breaking glass made him drop the goose and run. He also left his hat behind, which had been knocked off during the fight. The gang of thieves ran off too. Peterson was left to pick up the hat and the goose. Peterson went in search of the owner, didn't he? I asked. Well, that is the problem. We know who the owner is. There was a tag tied to the goose with the owner's name, for Mrs. Henry Baker. Inside the hat are the initials HB. I am sure the owner of the hat must be Mr. Henry Baker, but there are so many Henry Bakers in London. Peterson brought me the hat, but the goose had to be cooked. It would just be ruined otherwise. Suddenly, Peterson came running into the room. He was out of breath, sputtering. "The goose! The goose! My wife found this inside!" In his hand was a beautiful blue stone. It was about the size of a bean, but it was also pure and bright, that it twinkled like a star. "My goodness! Peterson, do you know what are you holding?" Holmes asked. "Is it the Countess of Morcar's blue carbuncle?" I asked. "I've been reading so much about it in the newspaper. There's a large reward of £1,000 for its return. I read that it was stolen from the Countess' room at the Hotel Cosmopolitan. Didn't the police arrest someone for the theft? If I remember correctly, his name is John Horner, a plumber. In fact, I think I have the story right here," said I. Holmes took the newspaper and started to read the article aloud. "Jewel robbery at Hotel Cosmopolitan. John Horner, a local plumber, was arrested for theft at the Hotel Cosmopolitan today. According to the police, he allegedly stole the jewel known as the Blue Carbuncle, from the jewel case of the Countess of Morcar. He was the result of the information provided by James Ryder, a hotel employee, point to Horner's skull. According to Ryder, Horner was sent to the Countess' room to fix a leaky pipe. For a short period of time, Horner was left alone in the room, while Ryder was called to perform other duties. On Ryder's return, Horner had left the room, and the Countess' dresser had been forced open. The Countess' jewel box was on the table, but it was empty. In a police statement, Horner had resisted arrest, claiming that he was innocent. However, Horner, already being a convict thief, is the most likely suspect. He will remain in jail until his trial. Holmes finished reading the newspaper and threw it down on the table. It just shows that the police don't know very much, doesn't it? He exclaimed. We know that he may be innocent. But Watson, one thing we must first find out is how the stone got into the bird. There are a few things we already know. This is the stone. The stone was inside the goose which came from Henry Baker. Our first task is to find Henry Baker. Get me a pencil and a paper. Holmes wrote the following. One large fat goose and a black felt hat belonging to Mr. Henry Baker, found at the corner of Good Street. The owner may receive his possessions at 221B Baker Street at 6:30 this evening. There, that's clear. Holmes handed the paper to Peterson. Here, Mr. Peterson, I would like you to put this message into all of the evening newspaper. The Globe, the Star, the Evening News, the Herald, all of them. And if there are any others, put the message in them as well. Yes, sir, I will do it immediately, replied Peterson. What will we do with the stone? Asked I. We will keep it here for now, Holmes informed us. Peterson, on your way back home, buy another goose like the one that your family is eating now. We will need another bird to give back to Mr. Henry Baker. Peterson left to attend to his errands. Holmes examined it. It's quite spectacular, isn't it? It's what crimes are made of. Look at it in the light. See how it shines and sparkles. It's a very valuable stone, I must say. This stone is only about 20 years old, but it already has a sinister history. There have been 2 murders, a suicide, and several robberies. Holmes then put the stone away in the safe, place for keeping. I'll drop a line to the Countess to say that we have it. Do you think that the plumber is guilty or innocent? I asked him. Well, it's very hard to say. Only time will give us the answer what we need. What about Henry Baker? Do you think that he had something to do with the theft? I asked. My guess is that he has no idea about it whatsoever, but we will find out tonight. Thought when he comes to claim his goose and his hat. We can't do anything about this until then. Then I should be going, I told Holmes. I have many things I need to do. There are many sick people whom I need to visit, but I am very curious about how this case proceeds. I will return before 6:30 p.m. tonight if you don't mind, I said. Of course not. I would like to have your thought on the matter too. Why don't you stay for dinner? We'll eat at 7. I left home there and I returned just before 6:30 that evening. I walked toward the house and I noticed that there was a tall man waiting outside. We both entered the house together. Holmes welcomed us both in and said, I trust that you are Mr. Henry Baker. The man said that he was, and Holmes offered him a chair by the fire. You look like you are very cold. Watson, you have come just at the right time. Is this your hat? Holmes asked the man. Yes, it is. And the bird? Yes, the bird, Holmes said. Yes, the bird. Unfortunately, we had to eat it. You ate my bird! The man exclaimed, looking quite upset. We had to. It would have been rude if we didn't eat it then. We have another for you. It is about the same size. Surely it will do to replace the one we ate, won't it? Yes, of course. It will be fine, said the man. Holmes and I looked at each other. It was obvious to us that the man knew nothing about the stone inside. He was just happy to have another bird to replace the one he had lost. Holmes then went and gave the man his hat and the bird. Just out of curiosity, where did you buy your goose from? It tastes very good, and I'd like to buy another one from where you got it, Holmes asked. I got it at the Alpha Inn. I go there almost every night. The owner started a goose club, and all of us in the club put a few pennies every week. At Christmas, everyone gets a goose. Thank you so much, Mr. Holmes, for the goose and my hat. Mr. Henry Baker said good night to us and left. Holmes closed the door after him and said, So much for Henry Baker. Chapter 2. The Goose Chase. It was now about 7 p.m. We had planned to have dinner at that time. Are you hungry, Watson? Holmes asked me. Not really, I replied. Let's eat later and follow this new clue while it is still hot, he said. We got dressed and headed outside. It was a bitterly cold night. We put on our overcoats and wrapped our throats. Outside, the snow was falling heavily, and the wind was blowing hard. Our breath looked like smoke. We quickly made our way to the Alpha Inn. We went inside and ordered 2 glasses of beer. I hope your beer are taste as good as your geese, Holmes said to the owner. The owner looked surprised and said, My geese? Yes, I heard from Mr. Henry Baker. I believe that he is in your goose club. Oh, I see. They are not our geese. I bought them from a man who sells meat at Covent Garden. Breckinridge is his name. Thank you very much, sir, Holmes said, as we put our coats back on. We went out again into the frosty air. "Now for Mr. Breckenridge," Holmes said, as he buttoned his coat. Soon after we found ourselves in the Covent Garden Market. We walked around until we saw a sign with Breckenridge on it. The owner was a horsey-looking man. He and a small boy were just closing up. "Good evening. You wouldn't have any geese left tonight, would you?" Holmes asked the man. "You can have 500 in the morning," replied. "No, I want the same ones you sold to the Alpha Inn. They were fine birds. Where did you get them?" This question made the man very angry. "I'm sick of hearing about those birds. Everyone been asking about them. I haven't heard anything else all day. You would think they were the only geese in the world. People are making such a fuss about them," he snapped. "Well, I don't know anything about the other people," said Holmes. He sounded as if he did not care very much about it. "But if you won't tell us where you got them from, I'll have to call off my bet. I bet £5 that those geese will rise in the country," Holmes told the man. "You will lose. Those geese will rise in town," Breckenridge said. "No, I cannot believe that," Holmes said. "I'll make a bet with you," replied the man. Holmes laughed and said, "That will be an easy £5 for me." Breckenridge called to the boy. "Bring me my books." He opened up his book. "Look here. See this? It says December 22nd, 24 geese at 7.5 shillings each bought from Mrs. Oakshott, 117 Brixton Road, number 249. Sold to the Alpha Inn at 12 shillings each. So, what do you think of that?" Holmes pretended to be angry. He pulled a coin from his pocket and slammed it down on the table. He stormed out of the market, and I followed just behind. When we had gotten completely out of the market, Holmes started laughing. "It's so easy to get what you want." I noticed that the man likes to bet because he had a horse racing form in his pocket. I knew he couldn't resist a bet like that, Watson. We will have this case solved very soon. Let's call it a night, and have a dinner. We can visit Mrs. Oakshott tomorrow." Just as Holmes finished speaking, we heard a loud noise back in the market. We could hear Breckenridge yelling. We went inside and heard Breckenridge shout, "Get out of here! I don't want to hear another word about those geese. I don't want to see you around here ever again." Perhaps we don't need to go and see Mrs. Oakshott in the morning after all," Holmes said. "Let's find out who this man is, Watson." We followed the man and came up close behind him. Holmes touched the man's back, which caused him to leap into the air. His face had turned white from the surprise. "Who are you? What do you want?" he cried. "Excuse me, but I heard you asking about geese before. I think I might be able to help you." He looked very suspiciously at Holmes and me. Who are you? And what do you have to do with the geese? He asked. This is Watson, and I am Sherlock Holmes. I know that you are looking for a goose that was sold to Mr. Henry Baker. Mr. Henry Baker bought the goose from the Alpha Inn, which had bought the goose from Mr. Breckenridge. Mr. Breckenridge had initially bought the goose from Mrs. Oakshott. The man's appearance changed. He looked very happy and cried, "Oh, you are the very people I need." "Come over to my house," said Holmes. "What is your name?" The man hesitated for a bit and then said, "John Robinson." "I would like to know your real name," said Holmes calmly. The man looked very guilty and then said, "James Ryder." "Yes, right. You are employed at the Hotel Cosmopolitan. Why don't we take this cab? We will talk about everything when we get into my home," said Holmes. The man seemed to be a little afraid. He hesitated to get into the cab for a while, but eventually he decided to join us. We were all quiet during the ride. "Here we are," said Holmes cheerily. "You look cold, Mr. Ryder. Please take that seat by the fire. Now, I guess you really want to know what happened to your goose," Holmes asked him. "Oh, yes, sir." "Well, it came here. It was very strange. I've never seen a dead goose lay an egg before, especially when it is a bright blue egg like this one." Holmes held up the blue carbuncle. "It's over, Ryder. We are on to you." Upon hearing that, the man started to faint. We gave the man a small amount of brandy. He quickly came to. "I know almost everything," said Holmes. "It is a terrible thing that you have done to Horner. You knew about his previous conviction, and you knew that he would be the first suspect. You set up the whole thing for Horner to go into the Countess' room, and then be blamed for the theft." The man was now quite terrified and begged, "Please don't tell the police. I'm really not a bad man." "Now that you've been caught, you are sorry, but you didn't care whether Horner suffered in jail or not," Holmes said. "All right, I'll leave the country. Please don't tell the police. Tell us everything that happened," demanded Holmes. All right. I stole the stone, but even after the police arrested Horner, I knew I was not safe. I had to get the stone away because the police might search me at any time. I quickly went to my sister's place. She is Mr. Oakshott. As you already know, she raises geese at my sister's place. I decided I would go to Kilburn. A man I know lives there, and he is a criminal. I knew he would be able to help me sell the stone, but I was worried that the police would find the stone on me. My sister has promised to give me a goose, so I chose the one of her geese. The one I chose was a big one with a bar on its tail. I opened up its beak and forced the stone down its throat. I had to struggle with it, and it jumped out of my arms. I went back to other geese. I caught it again and took it to Kilburn. My friend and I cut the goose open, but then I was horrified. There was no stone. I quickly went back to my sister's house. I asked her if there were any similar birds, and she said that there was one. The problem was, though, that she had already sold it to Breckenridge. You know the rest of the story. Holmes and I listened to his story. Holmes didn't say anything, but he had a solemn look on his face. Suddenly, he stood up, threw the door open, and shouted, "Get out!" The man was quite frightened, but relieved. "Oh, thank you, sir. God bless you," he said. The man quickly ran out down the stairs. We could hear him trip down the stairs in his rush to get away. I looked at Holmes inquisitively. "Watson, I am never paid for my work by the police. The stone will be returned to the Countess. Ryder will not testify against Horner now, so he will be released from prison. Ryder will not do anything wrong again. So I see no point in sending him to jail. It will just make life difficult for his own family. It is the Christmas season. We have to find it in our hearts to forgive, especially at this time of year. Now, I think it's time we look into another bird. Let's hope our dinner won't start us on another goose chase."